Aloha, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to History 241, Session 7. And today we would be talking about India during and after the Mauryan Empire. My name is Abdul Karim Khan. I teach here at Leeward Community College. And before I get you to my email, let me remind you of the WebCT drill. So please go to WebCT and check your weekly assignments or weekly readings or whatever you need to do. So for the tests are concerned or the assignments are concerned. So please check WebCT on regular basis and check the weekly assignments. If you need to contact me, my contact is at Leeward Community College. And there on your screen is the email. So note that down, and it's also on your course outline. So, and the new or the latest or the current telephone number would be also listed on the course outline. So just in case you need to email me or to phone me, use the current one on your course outline. And welcome to History 241, Civilizations of Asia. Session 1 and Session 7, and today we would be talking more about the Mauryan Empire, especially during the Ashokas. And let's see first what we did last time in terms of the review. Last time we talked about India, how we got the term India and the Indian and where it came from, the Sanskrit or the Persian language, and how Indians used their relations with the Iranians or with the Persians in shape of trade and business, as well as language and political relations. We also talked about the Greek republics in the northwest and the Indian kingdoms in the northeast. We also emphasized the small nature or the limited scope of the republics and the huge big scope or nature of the kingdoms in the northeast. We also talked about the Magadha kingdom as sort of the native Indian kingdom in the northeast. And we talked also about the Alexander the Great and his invasions of India and how the Greeks impacted on India. And then we started with the rise of the Mauryan Empire, which today would be the main talk of our presentation. Now, so far the history of India is concerned from now onward. It's about the end of the BC period and the start of the AD period, BC being before Christ and AD being after Christ. So we're just about that threshold, getting out of the BC period, before Christ period, and getting into the AD period. However, for those people who made history or those who were involved, it did not matter to them whether they were in BC or whether they were going into the AD after Christ period. It did not matter to them because history is not so much made by men or great heroes as it is made by the circumstances on the ground. So these circumstances, the situation on the ground, the economic, the political, the natural disaster, etc., or the movement of people, some of them are forced to go from point A to point B, or they're pushed into out of their own original place and into some other areas. These sorts of natural or political circumstances take long times. So that's the reason, keep in mind that even if we are transitioning from the BC period into the AD period, after Christ period, the situation would still seem to be the same. And the same invasions, the same rise of empires, the same destruction or the disintegration of the already existing empires, some of them big, some of them small. So the process would be the same, the rise and fall of different empires in India, some of them coming from outside, some of them would be the native internal inside India product, the empires and the people who would come into power. So let's see what we have today. Today we would be talking more about the Mauryan Empire, especially under Ashoka and his rule, his personality, how he ruled and how he established the Mauryan Empire. We will also talk about the inscriptions, the writings of Ashoka on rock and pillars. We would also talk about his Dhamma and non-violence, the religious law, the Hindu law or the moral law and the non-violence that he wanted to propagate in India. Also, we will talk about Arthashastra, the book of kings or the book of state or the book of government. So it's a sort of political treatise or political book for the kings and how the king should rule or how the prince should rule. And we would, of course, end at the Mauryan Empire. And then the end of the Mauryan Empire would lead to the rise of new empires. So the Mauryan Empire is not going to be the last empire. You would see the rise of new empires and new people. Which brings me to the same old theory that in India, it's a huge big place and a lot of people. On the northwestern side, India was exposed to other nations, especially Afghanistan as it is today, and Iran, in the northwest. And that was sort of a passage for India to get out and meet other people. Especially the Western people, the Iranian people, the Greek people, the Roman people, the Arabs, the larger Middle East. But at the same time, that was also a passage for those other people to come into India. And most of the time, the coming was not like very peaceful. Yes, there was, trade and business and commercial people, merchant people. They would come from Greece and Rome and Persia and the Middle East, from Africa. They would come. But the big time coming was always, by the armies, by different other kings, empires that would come and, they always would keep their eyes on India. So if you were a sort of a ruler of Greece, and if you could control modern day Turkey or a little bit of area of Iran, you would not be just satisfied with that. You would definitely like to get into India. And by this time, India was always big news as it is today in the whole world. India was always, it made big news, especially after Alexander the Great, who came to India, around 326-27 BC. He came to India and brought a lot of Greek people with him. And then all these Greeks who went back or those who settled, in different parts of India, they spread the news about India, how rich India was, the wealth and the fable of India, throughout the Western Europe and Eastern Europe especially. And so it, brought people, attracted people to India. All these stories, all these, facts and figures about India that the Greek could spread. And some of them were, fiction also. So that's how you would see the same pattern and design repeating itself, or history repeating itself again and again in India, which we can summarize it in the rise and fall of the great empires in India. Some of these empires would be native, and a lot of them would be foreigner. And as these foreigners would come to India, they would, with the passage of time, within 100 years or 200 years or whatever number of years, they would be Indianized. So they would become the sons and daughters and the children of the soil of India. And so we would refer to them as Indians. And they would lose, maybe even their language or their religion to the languages and religions of India. And so let's see, start with the Mauryan Empire under Ashoka. Okay. Ashoka, who ruled somewhere around 272 to 232 BC. He came on the world scene, or especially in India, about 100 years after after Alexander the Great. He lived more than 200 years before Christ. And after Alexander, 100 years after Alexander, you see him, Ashoka, who was also called or known as Piyadasi, the greatest king that India produced. And for so many reasons that we would go in and we would find out. So keep in mind the rise of Ashoka, close to about 272 and between 272 and 232 BC. And he was also known as Piyadasi. So sometime you won't see his name on his writings. In his writing, you would see only Piyadasi, so that's also his name. He was also called Devanama Piya. That was a title, Devanama Piya, which simply means the beloved of the gods. And that first syllable or three letters, Dev, that is a reference to God, and it is most probably from this term that we get the English term deity, God. So you can check your own dictionary for the deity, where is the etymology coming from. But most probably that deity, the English deity, is derived from the Sanskrit, the Indian term Dev for God. So he was called beloved of the gods, and that's how you see on his inscriptions. When he came to power, he secured mostly his, whatever possession he had from his father and forefathers. And in 260, he decided to expand his empire, his kingdom, especially in the east. But in the southeast, there was this other place called Kalinga, which was known for being a place of very brave people. But that place of brave people could also be a great threat to Ashoka's empire, and so he wanted to eliminate that threat and bring Kalinga and its people under his Mauryan Empire. Well, he had a large army. He sent a huge big army, himself went there, and he conquered Kalinga. The Kalingans, they put up a great resistance, a great fight. Most probably this was the greatest fight that India had ever experienced. Now, in this fight that Ashoka imposed on the people of Kalinga, this was a fight between Indians and Indians, not between Greeks or Iranians coming to India, which they had been doing and would do. But this was between Indians and Indians. And so the Ashoka's Mauryan Empire wanted to take out this threat, Kalinga, in the southeast of the empire. Ashoka at that time was, much more seated or much more had a hold on Magadha. But he wanted to take Kalinga because Kalinga was threat to his northeastern empire of Magadha. So he invaded 260 BC with a huge, big, large army. He did not, he didn't think that the Kalingans' army would be ready to die rather than being, subjugated. So the war was very fierce, very bloody, in which hundreds and thousands of Kalingans were killed. And that is how a lot of people lost their lives, especially the Kalingans. They lost their lives. Also, those who survived, the vast majority of them were captured alive, and they were captured as and taken as prisoners of war. So these prisoners of wars would later on become sort of, slaves. So here, hundreds and thousands of Kalingans, they perished in the war, and it was such a bloody war, such a, mayhem, that Ashoka came to realize that this was not really worth the price. Yes, he wiped out Kalinga. Yes, he brought it under his control, but that place was not really the worth, the sacrifice, the butchery that the war created. So he he was full of remorse over this conquest, and so as sort of expiation and his atonement, he converted to Buddhism. Now this Buddhism was truly, a real conversion. This conversion to Buddhism was sincere, genuine, and with good intentions. Now, when he converted to Buddhism, he wanted to, because to him Buddhism was a very peaceful religion, and he wanted to spread the peace of Buddhism throughout the empire. So he sent not only just in India but outside India. When he secured his position and there was no any more threat to him, he started spreading peace, and he sent diplomatic missions to Iran, to Greece, and some scholars say to Egypt. And these diplomatic missions not only made aware Iranians and the Greek and the Egyptian and in between anybody of the existence of the Mauryan Empire and the great king Ashoka that he was. But by that reason, he also aroused the Greek interest in India. So Greek people came to know more and more about India, and now they were hearing and listening and knowing things about India from an Indian ruler, an Indian king, an Indian people going to Greece and telling the Greeks, how great India was. This also led to another great thing. So for writing is concerned, what happened was, as he aroused the interest of other nations, the Greeks and the Persians, the Syrians, the Romans, these people did pay visits. They did come to India. Now, most of these people, of course, they spoke their own languages. They wrote in their own languages. So when they came to India, they would write about India. Every person could not come to India. Those who came to India would be either merchants, businessmen, and merchants and businessmen, they always, read and write. At least, accounting, they know better. So these people would come and visit, different places in India, and they would write about the society, the culture, the religion, the politics, the economy of India. Just like as we go anywhere and we, observe, watch things, and then, some of us, we do write what we learn or bring photos and pictures and, show it around to families and friends. This is exactly these people did. So they would go back to Iran, to Greece, Rome, Mesopotamia, the larger Middle East and even North Africa like Egypt. They would go there and spread the knowledge of India. Now, it's an interesting point. At this point, and even a little bit later, more people wrote about India than the Indian themselves. And that is the reason when we don't have much Indian sources to base our story on about Indian politics, Indian economy, Indian society, or Indian rulers, then we turn to the writings of the Iranians in Persian, those who wrote about India, the writings of the Greek people who wrote in Greek, the writing of other people, the Syrians, who most probably wrote in Aramaic language or Arabic language or Hebrew language or the Egyptian language. So what happened was, when Ashoka opened India in peacetime to other nations, to other people to come and visit India, as it happened, what happened was, this was the starting point of foreigners writing about India. Some of it, not really understood, and some of them misunderstood the situation on the ground. They did not understand why the Indians were doing what they were doing in shape of, in terms of the religious sacrifices or social, events. But they wrote about, and that's how we get such a huge, big, source of knowledge about India. And as I said, mostly from foreign sources than Indian sources. And that was the good thing. At the same time, let's see further. At the same time, you would see Ashoka writing his, things upon rocks and upon pillars, these rock or pillar inscriptions, and he would write to the people, this is what I want you to do. And so he would always start with, beloved of the gods, Piyadasi speaks to you, or speaks this, or this is like saying, by the order of the king or by the order of the czar. This is what people should know about his intentions, about his rule, about the regulations, about the law in his country, and this is what the king wants you to do. So he wrote these things. Now, the writing that he did mostly was in the local languages. Here is a very, magnificent icon or sort of a seal of Ashoka, which, by the way, even today is the seal of India. Just like you have the American seal or the British or anywhere else, every nation has its own seal for official documents. This is the seal of the Indian government, and it comes directly to India or from the time of Ashoka. So let's see. What happened was local languages in which he had to, express his views to the people, gave birth to a lot of reading and writing, and encouraged some of these languages that did not even, these were spoken languages but not written. So writing was encouraged, and you see the rise of different scripts. The Greek script was widely used, especially in the Northwest. Another script was very widely used, Aramaic, in Greece and Afghanistan and Iran. And the northwestern part of India, Greek and Aramaic script was used also. This Aramaic script, not much known, but it was the script of the language of the family of Christ. And wherever Christianity went, it spread it. But wherever Christianity shrank, it's also shrank, the script. So some scripts becoming the vehicle or the medium of religion, in which that religion was spread around in different parts of the world. But as the religion shrank because of the rise of other religions, so the script also disappeared. And that's one, language, Aramaic and the Aramaic script, that with the rise of Christianity, it spread, and with the shrinking of Christianity in the region due to the rise of other religions, and stronger religions in the region that were protected or supported or championed by rulers, so Aramaic, disappeared. But it was once upon a time a very widely used language that was used not just only in Palestine at that time, but also in Greece, in Iran, in Afghanistan, and northwestern India. So Ashoka would make himself known and his laws known in the local languages. So that was good for the local languages, that they adopted different scripts, and now they would be written. Okay, let's see another script, the Brahmi script in East India, which is closer to the Sanskrit script. So that's another example how the local languages got written. What I'm saying here, all languages, they have speech, of course, but all languages never had their own scripts. So they had to borrow scripts from other major languages that existed at that time. Just like the Japanese, they had a beautiful language, but they never had a script to write in, so they adopted the Chinese characters to write their Japanese incompatible language. So that's how these languages were encouraged. Another language, Kharoshti, which is closer to sort of, in speech at least to my mother tongue Pashto, but it was written in Aramaic-like script in northwestern India. And so that's another, wonderful source of knowledge about Ashoka's rule, and even after the rule of Ashoka, about the Mauryan Empire and other empires that rose in India. So keep in mind, from now onward, you would see the mixing not of the people, but of languages, not only in speech, that people would pick up terms, terminologies, vocabulary, words from different languages and use it, just like as we do. You can use so many words of English and Arabic, if not so much vice versa. So that's how people started using, sitting in India, using their local language. For example, I give you one example of Pashto, maybe at the cost of, self-promoting my own language. Pashto, which is spoken in northwestern Pakistan and southeastern Afghanistan. It's a big language, spoken by 20 million people. But that language, like these people, the people, Pashtun people in that area, they adopted Greek terms, they adopted Indian terms, they adopted Iranian terms, even Arabic terms. So with the rise of a major religion in the area, that religion would contribute some words, some phrases, some terminology, some vocabulary to the local language. And as many religions that would rise and fall, as many empires that would rise and fall, these religions and empires would definitely leave their marks on the speech of the people. They also change, even the race and the ethnicity of the people, the rise and fall of the empires. So that's what you see, the rise and fall of languages, the rise and fall or the expansion of languages and the scripts. Let's move further on in the presentation. Ashoka, once he became well established, he created good relations with the neighbors, and especially in the south with Sri Lanka, Ceylon, formerly called Sri Lanka. He also sent his son, and some people say his brother, by the name Mahinda. He sent to spread Buddhism as a Buddhist missionary to Ceylon, and that's why Ceylon is so much Buddhist these days. He also sent to the king of Ceylon or Sri Lanka the branch of the original Bodhi tree, also called locally people tree, Bodhi tree under which Buddha had found enlightenment, and he had meditated under that original tree, people or Bodhi tree. So he sent a sort of blessing and his goodwill gesture to the king of Ceylon. And that king of Ceylon, Tisa, he converted to Buddhism, of course, and he modeled himself more like Ashoka, who was now seen as a very peaceful king. So Ashoka, definitely he spread Buddhism inside India and outside India. Ceylon is one example. But then, when the state support dropped at the death of Ashoka, then Buddhism also suffered. Sometimes Buddhism would be great, as long as, or any religion would be doing fine as long as it had the support of the state. But when the support, went down, so the religion also suffered in terms of, propagation, in terms of tolerance. And so it might lead to problems, if a religion is adopted by a state and the state is no more there, that religion would also suffer the same consequences. So let's move on, but keep in mind also that Ashoka, supported Buddhism. He also united the different peoples of India, the diverse number of people and races in his Mauryan Empire. And the economy, of course, as it is even today, always agrarian and agriculture. And that agriculture bumper economy, because of the peace that was, it kept the revenues, the taxes coming to Ashoka treasury. He had wonderful, great, efficient administrators who would collect taxes from people. He maintained roads, and he talks about the bridges that he constructed, the roads that he constructed for the safety and security of the people, for trade, for businessmen to go around, from one place. India is a huge, big place, country, so he made it possible through roads and communication and bridges. This is the maximum strength of Ashoka's empire as he lived. So it's a huge, big empire, from northwestern India, which also has modern day complete Pakistan, some parts of Afghanistan, up to, in the east, up to Bangladesh, and down south, complete Deccan Plateau. So it's a huge, big, country that Ashoka made possible. Let's see further on. He also lived by Arthashastra, which was the writing of Kautilya, and Kautilya was the advisor of Chandragupta. Chandragupta sort of, the founding father of the Mauryan Empire, which now became Ashoka's empire. So he lived by this book, Arthashastra, which, as I said, taught the kings and the princes and the rulers how to behave, how to rule, and what to do and what not to do. Also, during Ashoka times, because of what happened in Kalinga, thousands and thousands of people killed, and so he captured these prisoners of wars and he deported them. The Shudras, especially the low caste people that lived there, the subjugated people of Kalinga, he deported them from their original place to other places to clear the forest and bring new lands under cultivation. Yes, he converted to Buddhism. Yes, he became very peaceful king, but still he had to rule, the land, the country, and so for that he needed the help of the low caste people, the workers, and the prisoner of wars, those who became now slaves. And so he brought more new land under cultivation. However, the land that was brought under cultivation, he settled the high caste people over there. So the land was cleared off, the shrub and the forest, brought under cultivation. They dig up, irrigation canals, and so now it was ready for cultivation. So he moved upper caste Hindus or people there, and these families, the upper caste families or other classes, they would have better economy, and that also helped the state economy. More taxes would come from these newly, new lands that were brought under cultivation. So the empire was becoming richer and richer. Yes, there were Shudras, the low caste people in the Hindu religion or Hindu society, and they worked like slaves. But keep in mind that slaves, as we know them in other civilizations, that type of slavery did not exist in India. And scholars believe it did not exist in India because the Shudras worked like slaves, so you did not need to have slaves. And that's the reason that slavery as we know it did not exist in India. But since the Shudras or the Shudras, the low caste people or the lowest caste people, worked like slaves, that's why there was no slavery. Now, Arthashastra talks about the reasons of slavery, why people became slaves. Number one, they were born in slave families or low caste families. Another, debt slaves, people who had accumulated a lot of debt and they didn't have any other means to pay, so they sold themselves to the people who had given them credit or loan. So that's how these people were called debt slaves. Some of them were permanent slaves, some of them were for a time being. When they paid off their debt, they became free. And of course, slavery, as everywhere, mostly results from war. And so POWs, prisoner of wars, they also became slaves. Some of them became judicial as a result of judicial punishment. And so slavery is a big topic everywhere in Western civilization, Eastern civilization, African civilizations. So it's a big problem. History is full of slavery, and no place was without it. Europe, Africa, Asia. But in India, at least, the type of slavery that we know, like the American slavery during the plantation time, in the United States, this type of a slavery that one person owned another person, that type of a slavery at least did not exist in India. And the reason was that slaves or Shudras, they lived in their own caste because of their religion, laws, religious laws. So they lived as slaves or worked as slaves, but they were not owned by any masters. They were slaves because of their birth in the slave dynasty or the slave family. Okay, let's move on further into presentation. Trade expanded because there was a lot of safety and security in the Mauryan Empire. So whenever there is, security, trade booms up. It also encouraged, Ashoka and his empire also encouraged small-scale cottage industries, especially of cotton and shipbuilding. So people could grow cotton and then make things out of it. And similarly, the coastal areas, shipbuilding was on the rise. It also encouraged the castes to become specialized, professional people of certain sort of work. So what you see during this period, the caste encouraged local artisans to specialize in certain professions, and these professional people would make their own unions called the guilds. So the guilds or the unions of the workers were related to the caste that was its job to pursue one or another. To give you an example, some caste would make weapons for warfare. So those castes would be encouraged to adopt making the warfare instruments or weapons as their profession. And so this profession would be not just for one generation, it would be for generations to come. And that whole caste or that place would be known for the production of that particular brand of weapon or particular brand of whatever they needed for warfare. Another caste, or especially among the low caste people, they would adopt dealing with hide, animal hide or leather. So they would be very good shoemakers compared to any other place in the world. They would be the best because they were born in this caste that adopted the shoemaking profession. So that is how caste became identified with work, with the profession, and that particular profession that they were now specialized or sort of had a specialty. And that is how the work also became like monopolized by the caste. So the professionalism, the monopoly, the caste being identified with the work, with the job, with the profession, all these things went together. And so what you see now from now onward, caste not so much in religious terms, but caste in terms of the work, the profession that certain families adopted, and they would live with it for lives, for generations, and this would be part of the the social fabric of India. Let's go further on in the presentation. In Ashoka's empire, prices were strictly controlled. Those who violated the price control system, they were punished. Ashoka himself traveled a lot to check and meet people, and especially the officials, and find for himself how the people lived. So he wanted to keep in touch with the people, so that's why he would travel a lot. His motto was that all people were his children. That was a great motto. So it gives you sort of patriarchal or patronage type of a motto, paternalistic type of a motto. And there's nothing wrong with that. If a king could treat his people like his children, meaning that he would treat them the way he would treat and take care of his children, that was nothing was wrong with that. And so he wanted to treat people and take care of them as his children, and that's how he lived. He had a lot of great tax collectors that filled his treasury. There were different people, supervisor or superintendents, that would take care of the forest that they were cleared off, or the timber that came from the forest, where it went, and public works and cattle. Each one, the forest, the public work, the cattle, would have its own superintendent. So government was becoming departmentalized, and each department would have its own head. And the bureaucracy was becoming much more salaried bureaucracy. So Ashoka's officers or officials or bureaucracy, they were paid people, paid by the state treasury. He also divided the country, his empire, into provinces and then down to districts and villages, and that was good for the administration to keep count. Also, Ashoka is known for his espionage system. Now, espionage had always been there, but this was much more like institution, the espionage of Ashoka, much more as an institution, as an agency. And he utilized a lot of people that people did not, would not think of these people as spies. Look at monks, especially Buddhist monks. There is a monk or preacher, living among you and he's a spy working for CIA or KGB, something like that, you know. So that's how he used different people, that people would not suspect them as spies, and yet they were merchants and artisans and prostitutes. Of course, even in modern times, these days, you know, a lot of agencies, big countries, United States, Russia, Soviet Union, you know, they take advantage of, you know, the situation the prostitutes are, or they reach to different people, and that's how prostitutes still this day they are used in the espionage system, in the spying game or spying system. So that's how Ashoka did. He used a lot other people, artisans, you know, merchants. He also used the local priests, you know, but all for a good reason, if I can call it that way. And the good reason was, let's see what was the reason. His intelligence, you know, it was collected to reward the good officials or punish the bad officials and check the enemies of the Mauryan dynasty, because, you know, there were people who hated this dynasty because he converted, you know, to Buddhism, and he championed Buddhism. So the Hindus, the Brahmins, the upper caste Hindus, they did not like it, and so they were the enemies of the empire. And so he, you know, sort of did the right thing to check the enemies. And also, but the real purpose of his intelligence was to check the officers or the officials or the bureaucracy of the state, how they were behaving and how they were treating people. So if they were treating people good, then he would reward them. If people complained, you know, about these officers, and they could not do it openly because of retribution or revenge of the officers, you know, that is how the spies, they would, you know, get knowledge about, or the knowledge about the work of these officers, you know, of the state. And if people were not happy with them, they would come to know, and the king Ashoka would also come to know, and that's how he would take care of the bad people, you know, that were responsible for the implementation of his laws, rules, you know, tax collection, all that. So that's how, you know, he used intelligence basically for a good purpose. Let's further see. He used danda, which is simply called punishment. You know, it means punishment, and still that term is used, danda. Danda means a stick. So he used stick, but he also used Dhamma or dharma. These are interchangeable, but when we talk about Ashoka, we better refer to it as Dhamma because that's the word he used. This is the Hindu moral law. So he used stick, but also he used morality, stick and carrot, both. Now, so far Dhamma is concerned, it meant to different people different things, but to Ashoka it meant social order, peace, you know, stability of the empire. That's what he meant, which also meant that if you were going to disturb the social order, if any person was out to disrupt the order or disrupt the peace, he would be punished, and danda would be used, stick would be used. By Dhamma, he also meant social responsibility on part of the people. People to people, people should recognize other people's dignity, especially of the low caste people. Don't treat them like animals. So Dhamma also regulated one person's behavior to the other, and it had a humanist type of a spirit. Humanist in the sense, you know, that all human beings are created equal, but not as, you know, what we mean by that now, but at least he wanted people to respect other people. You may not believe in their belief, that's fine, but at least respect their belief, respect their creed, respect their profession. And if you ask me, that was really a very advanced type of a thinking, very, you know, modern type of a thinking for those times, that the king wanted the high caste people to treat the low caste people good and better. So that, if you ask me, that was, you know, a very advanced thinking, very modern type of a thinking, and good thinking. He wanted to bring people together rather than split them and, you know, divide them and rule them. So he believed rule by uniting people, not rule by dividing people. Let's see further on in Dhamma. Ashoka's Dhamma, to him, it was a unifying force. He wanted to unite people by taking care of each other. He also wanted people to, obey parents and take care of their old parents. So it's sort of, getting into personal matters and family matters, but most states do that anyway. Generosity to neighbors and other people, that, he promoted among the people. Tolerance for other people's beliefs, that is a unique thing for those times, and he did it. And most probably all either under the influence of Buddhism or the good principles of a state, how a state should behave and how a state should promote good, society. Also, he, encouraged masters or sort of the high caste people to treat their slaves or the Shudras, good. So that was, also a very good thing on his part. He wanted the concord or the peace of creeds and castes. So people could believe in different religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism at that time, or any other ism, Mithraism, that came from Iran. So that was fine. Everybody should have their creed, whatever they wanted to believe, their caste, but at least nobody should fight over the differences in the caste and creeds, the beliefs and the profession that they had been engaged in. Now, the question why he was so good, to other caste, and the reason for that was that Mauryans, they came from, their own caste was very low. They did not come from very high caste, and so they understood caste discrimination, and so that's why they wanted to reach out to other castes, and they believed in not in the, one caste being ruling forever. They would rather like to have other castes, not just one Brahman caste to rule, but other castes to, perform their function in the society and in the state. And hence the heterodoxy of the caste was the preferred, principle or rule of Ashoka's Dhamma. So let everybody to join in the state, in the government, and, function. He brought diverse castes together in empire through the agency or through the promotion of the laws of Dhamma or the principles of Dhamma. So he believed in unity, not, dividing people. He wanted to unite people, and, that's how he could have a good state. He also believed in non-violence towards people as well as towards animals. He renounced violence, warfare. He did not want to conquer anymore, any place, any people, and nor he wanted to kill animals in sacrifices or for whatever reason people would kill animals. So he wanted to conquest more by mercy and clemency, being good to the neighboring states. That was his motto, not invade them, but rather invite them, to the goodness of the state that he had established. That sort of philosophy, not by killing, but by being merciful to other nations. He also banned useless ceremonies and sacrifices, and that was also good for the animals, at least, or to save the family's money. Don't spend your money on these useless rituals. Since he did not come from the Brahman caste, he could say these things. If he was a Brahman, then they would require you to do all these rituals, all these sacrifices, spend more of your money. And the more you spend money, the Brahman would love you, because they would get all that money in the temples. And so just like we give money to different religious leaders in Christianity, in Catholicism, or whatever religion they may be, so all religions, they live by the charities of the followers. So he encouraged people not to spend their money, but spend it on their own, on themselves, and rather than through the useless sacrifices and rituals of the religion. So that was good for families' economy. Let's see further on. Dhamma failed. Why? Not because it was a failed system, but because Ashoka died. He died in 232 BC. So that's a problem with any religion or any creed or system, political or economic, when the person, the individual king dies and the institutions are not really set up, or taken roots in the society, then that system goes away. So that's how Dhamma failed. Another problem after his death, there were too many social economic problems and a lot of caste differences that were there, but he could silence them for a time being to create a good society and state. But after his death, people went their own ways, their own caste, and hence you see the same problems rising. Revolts of the Brahmins. As I said, he was Buddhist. He championed the cause of Buddhism. He wanted to propagate Buddhism. The Brahmins, that is the leaders of the Hindu religion, they did not like it. So naturally they revolted against his empire after his death. But the Mauryan rule continued for about 50 more years and ended in 180 BC. So what you see here, with the death of a great king, his dynasty, there is no guarantee that would last forever or for any longer time. And that we see again and again with the death of an individual, strong individual who could control things, and people liked him, to be ruled by him because he was a very peaceful king and all that. So all that peace was there, so stability was there, violence was down because the king was a good king and people obeyed him willingly. But when he died, there was no guarantee that he would be followed or succeeded by good kings as good as he was. So people then don't listen, they go their own way. So individuals and sometimes institutions, like the Soviet Union, when it collapsed, we saw just so recently, 1990s, so much warfare, in the Balkan, Eastern Europe area. So when a strong system or a strong government, stable government and system dies, or individual king dies, then, things collapse, the system collapses, and the result is new people, they take over, new empires come into being, and this could be very chaotic situation. Until the time of another strong man or strong, stable system that is, created, then it's fine. Otherwise, it's very difficult. So that's how it happened to Ashoka's. Soon after his death, you see, on this early, burly, chaotic situation, and more foreign invasions, definitely. Internal uprising and external invasion, that would be like the fate of India. So let's see what happened next. After the death of Ashoka, the end of the Mauryan Empire. Definitely the end of Mauryan Empire. It ruled for some time, but times of troubles started for India. And these times of troubles, were the result of the death of Ashoka, the failure of one system, and another system was not in place. So definitely, times were not good and they were not peaceful. A lot of foreign invasion that you would see, and especially coming from the northwest frontier, that is modern day, Afghanistan and Pakistan. Military power would also shift within India from the northeast, that is the Magadha, which was the base of the Mauryan Empire, to Deccan, central India, and further south to the Tamil region in southern India. So within India, you would see the rise of different Indian native powers, rulers. And on top of that, you would see foreign invasion that would come from the Greeks, from the Iranians. So there would be definitely, a lot of troubles in India, a lot of fighting in India would happen, but things would settle down. And then, after that peace, there would be another, invasion and another peace. And so that's how the rise and fall of peace and strong empires in India. Let's see, after the death of Ashoka and the end of the Mauryan Empire, what you see is the rise of quite a few empires, like the Sanga's empire, the Andhra Empire, the Greco-Bactrian Empire, and the Greco-Indians empire, and the Saka's empire. Now, we have this long list of, 4 or 5, and more are coming, by the way. You see, the reason I'm giving you this list so that you would know, that there is sort of overlapping, meaning different empires, different people would rise to power and occupy the place that they were living in, or invade another place that they were living in, but this thing would happen simultaneously. So here what I'm saying is, you would see different people in different places rising, though in the same period. So the period would be the same. That's why there is the period overlapping. How come we have in the northeast of India, in 200 BC, this group of people rising, and then in the northwest of India in 200 BC, another group of people are rising? Well, that's natural, because India is a huge big subcontinent. It also included at that time Pakistan and Afghanistan. So it's a huge big country. So those people, whoever could rise in whatever places they did, and sometimes simultaneously. So different people in different places, but in the same period, would rise and make themselves into empires. Now, speak of empire. What is an empire? Empire is a process in which one nation gets up and brings other nation, other people, other places under their control. That is the making of an empire, when one group of people, they get out and bring other people, other places under their political, military, religious, or economic control and rule them. That is the making of empire, like the Greeks getting out, bringing non-Greeks under their control. That's the making of the Greek Empire. The Romans getting out of Rome, even out of Italy and going to Middle East, Africa, and as far west, like Spain and England. That was the making of the Roman Empire. So whenever another nation, brings another nation, third, fourth, fifth nation under their control, that's empire. And so that's how we call these, nations as empires. Let's see the Sunga first. Not necessarily that it was the first empire. It came into being close to about 185-72 BC. It was founded by its great leader Pushyamitra, and he ruled between 187 and 151 BC. It conquered most of Magadha, which was the seat or the base of the Maurya Empire and Ashoka Empire. So he conquered that area, and he murdered the last Mauryan ruler and brought the whole place under his control, the Sangas. Since he was called Pushyamitra Sanga, that is why the family and the empire became known after him. Now, remember the Ashoka people, they were Buddhist, or they at least championed the cause of Buddhism. This was a family or empire that reacted against Buddhism. And so Hinduism gained its lost power. So Hinduism again became like a state religion in Magadha, which used to be Buddhist, Buddhism, the state religion. And so Buddhism as a state religion was now replaced by Hinduism in Magadha, that is the northeastern part of India. Let's see on the map. This is the Sunga Empire that we're talking about in the northeastern part of India. Another empire, the Andhra Empire, close to about 100 BC and 225 AD. This was founded by Dravidians, the local native people of India, whose skin color was darker than compared to the foreigners. They were the native people, and a lot of them belonged to low caste, but they rose in power because of the vacuum that existed, and they brought Deccan under their control. And that's why the Andhra kings, they would use the title Lords of the Deccan. So the Andhra people became the Lords of the Deccan, and that's how they would rule there in peace. They could not move further, south, because there was not much land to conquer, or to the north because there were other people who had their own empires. They were very wealthy people. One reason being, wealthy Hindu rulers, one reason being that they didn't have to spend much of their money on warfare. They were Hindus, but they let Buddhist religion to grow and Buddhist art to flourish. So that's why in Andhra and that part of which I'm going to show you on TV and map, they let Buddhism grow, but at the same time they were Hindus, but they did not discriminate against the Buddhism. And here is the Andhra Empire in Deccan. That is a raised ground called the Deccan Plateau. So the Andhra being there. And since they didn't have to fight north and south with the other nation, that's why they were peace, and that's why they had much more money to themselves to save and live on. But they had to save themselves from defend themselves from other invasions. Let's further move on into other empires. The Greco-Bactrians. These people, their great leader, sometimes he's pronounced as Diodotus, and some people pronounce this as Diodotus, and Diodotus. I prefer Diodotus, which is much more like Greek, as he was a Greek person. Somewhere around 250 BC, he was the founder of what is called the Greco-Bactrian Empire. And there is his picture. He had his own, coins struck in his own image. And so the Greco-Bactrians, these people, they always lived sort of under the Persian rule, but now they revolted against the Persians, especially this particular group of people called the Parthians. Parthians were one group of the Persian people, and so the Greco-Bactrians lived under them. And that's how they revolted against the Persians and made their own empire. And that empire was much more like in Central Asia. Central Asia is the place that, those countries that in at stand like Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan. So those, and especially around the area of what is called locally Amudarya, and we call it in English as Oxus River. So there you see the rise of the Bactrian Kingdom. Now, look at the location. Bactrian Kingdom, most of Central Asia, parts of Iran, and parts of Afghanistan. Now, once any empire was established there, just like by law of nature or law of physics, they had to come down to India, and that has been the case all along. And so what you see, one group of the Greco-Bactrians, they would invade India, and later on we would refer to them as Greco-Indians, because they would split from Bactria and come to India. So there's the invasion into India, and so these people would establish their own kingdom, which is referred to as Greco-Indian Kingdom. One person by the name Demetrius, who was, Greco-Bactrian, and he revolted against his own king, and he conquered most of northwestern India, which is modern-day Afghanistan and Pakistan. So he proclaimed himself as the invincible king, a very powerful person, that title shows, and he struck his own coins in his name and image. But he was not the only one. As he controlled northwestern India, these were Greeks. So when they come into India and live in India and rule India, we refer to them as Greco-Indians. That's how, the history remembers them. So as he conquered and controlled northwestern India, another person by the name Menander, he conquered northeastern part of India, which is the Ganges India. As Demetrius conquered Indus India, Menander conquered Ganges India, and there he ruled and struck coins in his name. He also proclaimed himself king, rightfully so, and so Menander converted to Buddhism, because Buddhism at that time, just like any other kings had done, so he did too. He converted to Buddhism. Some people believe that it was genuine, and some sources say no, it wasn't genuine. It was all for political reasons, so that he would get the blessing of Buddhism, a major religion in India at that time. So that's how he converted to Buddhism. Now in Buddhist sources, he is called King Milinda. So whenever Buddhists would write about him, they would always refer to him as King Milinda. And that's how we know about him, more about him from the Buddhist sources. Now, these Greeks who came from, Bactria or Iran or Afghanistan, they became Indianized. And what it means, the more they became Indianized, the more they became settled, and the more they took care of, their, for some time, of their empires. There was no guarantee that their peace would not be broken and their empires would not be invaded. So that is what actually happened with them. They adopted local religion, Hinduism or Buddhism. They adopted local languages because they were surrounded, by the majority of the Indian people who spoke one or another language. So the ruling classes, sometimes they lost their languages if they could not impose it, or they could not turn their language as the language of the state, the official language. And it was difficult to do it, amidst the millions of Indians, to do that. That was difficult to keep your Greek or to keep your Aramaic or Persian difficult. But some later on we would see, was made, they would do it. They could do it. They had the force, they had the mechanism, or they had the means to keep their language, Turkish or Persian or whatever, intact. But the Greeks could not. And so the Greeks became Indianized. That is to say, more of the Indian influences there were upon the Greeks than the other way around. So it was not the Hellenization of the Indians, but the Indianization of the Greeks that you see in India. And that's, very natural. Just like the Americanization of other nations, other people who come to America, the Americanization of the Filipinos, or the Americanization of the Europeans, or the Americanization of the Arabs or the Indians when they come, down the road in 1 or 2 generations, their kids behave just like any other, American kid. And for good or for worse, some of us, we would like our kids to be just like on the old pattern, that we brought the culture from our, old countries, but that's impossible, very difficult. And I know it firsthand. So this is what was happening to the Greeks. They could not keep their Greek culture or language, so they became Indianized. They adopted Indian languages, Indian religions, Indian philosophies. Let's move further on and see that this group, the Greco-Indians, they were conquered by yet another group of people and foreign people. Those were the Saka people, and they established their Saka Empire. The Sakas, they were Scythians. They lived under the Persian rule, and so they broke from the Scythians. They were nomad people. They broke from the Persian rule and invaded northwestern India. The Sakas also joined hands with the Parthians. Now this was another Persian group like the Scythians. And the Parthians, we call them in India as Pallavas. And we know the Scythians in India as Sakas, so do not be, confused. The Scythians that are called Scythians in Persia, in India, they would be known as Sakas. The Parthians that are called Parthians in Persia, in Iran, they would be known as Pallavas in India. So the two intermixed and they joined hands, and together they invaded northwestern India. But each created their own empire in India. Let's see what they did. There is the map of the region, especially India. And so what you see, the Saka Empire in the northwest and the Pallavas Empire in the south. So this is a sort of, again, a sort of the same mechanism that was happening, that different, empire would rise and fall. And the Saka, of course, and the Pallavas would not stay forever. They would be invaded by, other nations from outside, or somebody from inside would spring up and, bring them under their control. So keep the process of invasions and the rise and fall of the empires as it happened. Just we saw with so many, people rising up in their empires and going down. Let's see, I think that's the end of today's presentation. Let's see in the, we have something more here. The Saka ended and replaced the Greco-Indian rule in northwestern India. In about 120 AD and 300 up to about 395 AD, they established their power, stayed in power in Malwa, with their great city capital of Ujjain, and they lost their northwestern India to the Kushans. So another, group of people are coming. In conclusion, what we did today, we saw the rise and the fall of Ashoka Empire, the Mauryan Empire under Ashoka. We talked about Ashoka's rule, how he lived, and how he treated the empire and how he ruled the empire, and how his death led to the rise of new empires. Now, in today's presentation, I would really like you to remember some of these things. One, the great Ashoka Empire, and number two, the downfall of the Mauryan Empire with the death of Ashoka. So after the death of Ashoka, you see, the Mauryan Empire going on, but at the same time, you see the rise of other empires, like the Sangas, the Andhras, the Greco-Bactrians, and the Greco-Indians, and the Saka people that would be coming. So keep in mind the rise and fall of different empires in India, some of them native, bringing foreigners under their control, and some of them coming from outside, Iran and Greece and, Bactria, from outside, and bringing the native people under their control. So you have two types of process, one happening internal and the other happening from outside. But each and every one, in India being very much affected by the rise and fall of different empires. And that's the end of today's presentation, and thank you very much for tuning in.